In every family, there's a child who takes up less space than the others, not because they have less to say, but because they learned very early that the space wasn't really theirs. They're the easy one, the low-maintenance one, the one who doesn't cause trouble, doesn't ask for much, doesn't make noise. And because they don't, nobody thinks to check. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, and this child never squeaked, so the oil never came. This is the forgotten child. And forgotten doesn't mean unloved. It doesn't even mean ignored on purpose. It means overlooked, slowly, quietly, consistently, until the child stops expecting to be seen and starts building a life around not being. In this video, we're going to follow one version of this child, a composite drawn from patterns that show up again and again. We'll trace them through 10 signs, not as a list, but as a thread. Because these signs don't exist in isolation. They're chapters in the same quiet story. Let's set the scene. The forgotten child is usually not the oldest, who got the attention of the firstborn, not the youngest, who got the tenderness of the last, and not the one who acted out, who got the attention that comes with being difficult. The forgotten child is the one in between, the one who was fine. They might have been the middle child or the second daughter, or the quiet son in a loud family. The details change, but the dynamic doesn't. There were louder needs in the room, and this child's needs weren't louder. So they adapted. They became the easy one. Not because they were born easy, but because easy was the only role left. What makes this an invisibility adaptation, and not just a birth order quirk, is what happens next. The child doesn't just accept being overlooked. They internalize it. They begin to believe that their needs genuinely matter less. And from that belief, 10 quiet habits grow. Number 1. They were the easy child, the one who never caused trouble. While a sibling threw tantrums or demanded attention, this child sat quietly. They ate what was served. They didn't complain. They made themselves frictionless because friction in this house was already taken. If someone was going to be fine without anything, it was going to be them, and the adults around them praised it. "She's so easy," they'd say. "He never gives us any trouble." The praise felt warm for a moment, but it carried a quiet message underneath. "We notice you most when you need the least." That message landed. It stuck. And it became a rule this child would follow for decades. So what does a child do when the clearest praise they receive is for needing nothing? They get better at needing nothing. Number 2, they learn to need very little, not want very little, need. There's a difference. This child still wanted things, a hug, a question about their day, a parent who sat on the edge of the bed and asked, "How are you really?" But wanting something that doesn't come is painful, so the child did something clever. They redefined the want as unnecessary. They taught themselves that needing less was strength, that self-sufficiency was maturity, and by the time they were a teenager, they'd become so good at not needing anything that people genuinely believed there was nothing to give. The need didn't disappear. It just went underground where it's been sitting ever since. Small, patient, and completely unaddressed. Number 3, they watched their siblings get attention and told themselves it was fine. Maybe a sibling had bigger problems, or bigger talents, or bigger feelings. And the parents, limited in bandwidth, doing their best, turned toward the noise. This child watched. They saw the attention flow toward the sibling who struggled or the sibling who shone, and they felt a quiet ache they couldn't name. But instead of saying, "What about me?" they said, "It's fine. They need it more." And that sentence became a trapdoor. Because the moment a child decides that someone else's needs are more valid than theirs, they begin erasing themselves, one concession at a time, until the erasing feels like generosity instead of loss. And here's the part that makes this a family dynamic, not just a personality. The siblings usually had no idea. They weren't villains. They were just the ones whose needs were louder, and nobody sat the family down and said, "We're all going to take turns being seen." So nobody took turns. And this child quietly opted out. Number 4, they became invisible on purpose, because visible meant vulnerable. At first, being unseen was something that happened to them, but at some point it became something they chose. Because they noticed, when they were visible, nothing good came of it. Visibility meant risking disappointment, risking the proof that no one would come even if they called. Invisibility, on the other hand, was at least predictable. So they shrank. They spoke less. They sat in corners of rooms where nobody looked. They dressed to blend. They developed a talent for entering and exiting spaces without being noticed, not because they were shy, but because they had learned that taking up space was a gamble they could no longer afford to lose. Number 5, they stopped raising their hand in class, in life, everywhere. This child once had things to say, ideas, questions, observations that were just as sharp as anyone else's. But every time they raised their hand, at home, at school, in a group, the response was lukewarm, not hostile, just thin. A nod, a quick, "That's nice." And then the attention moved on. After enough thin responses, the hand stops going up. Not because the thoughts stop coming, but because the child learns that offering them doesn't change anything. They still think, they still notice, they just stop volunteering it. And the world reads that as quiet, as reserved, as someone who doesn't have much to say. It's not. It's someone who stopped believing anyone wanted to hear it. But the thoughts didn't disappear. They just found somewhere else to go. Number 6, they developed a rich inner world because the outer one didn't include them. This is one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking signs at the same time. The forgotten child, left without enough external attention, turned inward. They built a world inside their own head, vivid, detailed, safe. They became readers, daydreamers, thinkers. They created imaginary conversations, imaginary friendships, imaginary versions of family life where someone asked them how their day was. And that inner world became both a refuge and a cage. It kept them company when no one else did. But it also became so complete that they stopped reaching outward. Because why would you knock on a door that's never open when you've already built a perfectly good room of your own? Number 7, they downplay their own achievements because nobody celebrated them first. This child got good grades, or made something beautiful, or hit a milestone, and the response was nothing, not cruelty, just absence. No one was watching when it happened, so they learned to provide their own response. It wasn't a big deal. Anyone could have done it. I just got lucky. Now, as an adult, they deflect every compliment, minimize every win, and feel a strange discomfort when someone tries to celebrate them, because celebration for them was never the natural response to success. The natural response was silence. And anything louder than silence feels wrong, unearned, suspicious, like sitting in a chair that was never meant for them. And so this child, now grown, now accomplished, now carrying a life full of things they never let themselves celebrate, arrives at the sign that cuts the deepest. Number 8, they feel guilty when someone finally pays attention to them. This is the strangest and most painful one. The thing they wanted most, to be seen, now makes them uncomfortable. A partner asks how they're feeling. A friend notices they've gone quiet. A therapist holds a silence for them to fill. And instead of relief, they feel guilt, as if they're taking up time someone else deserves more. This is the invisibility adaptation at its deepest. The forgotten child didn't just learn to live without attention. They came to believe they didn't deserve it. So when it arrives, uninvited, it doesn't feel like nourishment. It feels like theft, like they're stealing a spotlight that belongs to someone more important. Number 9. They became the permanent observer, always on the outside of every group. Watch them at a gathering. They're there. They're participating. But there's a thin glass wall between them and everyone else. They watch conversations happen. They notice dynamics. They understand the room better than anyone in it. Because they've been watching rooms their entire lives from the edges. It's not introversion, though it looks like it. It's a position they were assigned in their family and never left. They were the audience to everyone else's drama, the background to everyone else's foreground. And now they carry that role into every room they enter. Always watching, rarely centered, never quite sure if they're allowed to step into the frame. Number 10. The thread that ties it all together. They still don't ask for help, even when they're drowning. This is every sign collapsed into one behavior. They don't ask because they learned that asking doesn't work. They don't ask because needing things makes them feel guilty. They don't ask because they've spent a lifetime building a self that runs without external input. And admitting they need something feels like the whole structure might come apart. You'll see them struggling quietly, burning out without mentioning it, carrying something they shouldn't carry alone. And if you ask, really ask, and wait, their first instinct will be to say, "I'm fine." Because that's the sentence they've been practicing since they were the quiet child in the corner of a room full of louder needs. They're still that child. They just grew taller around them. And somewhere inside that child is still sitting in the corner of a room, not because there's nowhere else to sit, but because no one ever pulled out a chair and said, "This one's for you." If you followed this child all the way here and you recognize them, I want you to know something. The forgotten child was never actually invisible. They were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to see quiet. You were not overlooked because you were unimportant. You were overlooked because your pain was polite, and the world pays attention to the pain that's loud. That doesn't make the quiet pain smaller. It makes it lonelier. You're allowed to take up space now. You're allowed to need things. You're allowed to raise your hand and not apologize for having something to say. The room was always big enough for you. You just weren't told. At Inner Lens, we look for the child who was never quite seen, and we hold the light a little longer. If this story felt like yours, the next video follows the thread into a deeper place. What happens when childhood abandonment becomes the blueprint for how you love? It's right here.